As we begin this episode, I want you to really think about what makes you who you are. How do you know that you're the same you as you were 5 years ago? And how do you know that you from 5 years ago is the same you as you were when you were born? Where does your unified sense of identity come from? I'm going to argue that it comes from our memory. I know that I'm the same me that I was 5 years ago because I remember being me 5 years ago. I remember my birthday party and my friends and where I was. Of course, I've gone through changes, but I know that I'm still me. And that's what memory does. It lets us know that we're still us. So what happens when memory becomes compromised? In Season 2, Episode 4 of the TV show Rick and Morty, Total Rickall, we meet the memory parasites. Creatures that have the ability to alter memory as a way of forcing themselves into our lives. Today, we're doing a deep dive to figure out how the memory parasites do what they do. Welcome to Singularity. Alright, before we jump in, let's recap, in case you haven't seen this episode or it's been too long to remember. In Total Rickall, Rick wakes up one morning to find a new addition to the family, Uncle Steve. He immediately shoots him. Turns out Uncle Steve was a parasite that someone had tracked in from an adventure with the power to implant itself into the memories of anyone it meets. By implanting those memories, the parasites build a sense of familiarity with the host, to allow themselves to start multiplying. Rick then warns the Smith family to be on guard for any wacky, zany characters that suddenly appear. From there, the episode continues to introduce more and more parasites, including some personal favorites, Hammer Eye, Photography Raptor, Ghost in a Jar, and Tiny Cowboy on a Dog. The extended family continues to argue about who's real and who isn't until Morty figures out the parasite's weakness. They can only implant positive memories. The family goes around shooting anyone that they don't have a bad memory with until only 6 are left standing. Rick, Morty, Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Mr. Poopy Butthole. Until only 5 are left standing. Rick, Morty, Beth, Jerry, and Summer. So starting off, we know 2 things about these parasites. 1, they can implant memories with amazing efficiency. Like efficient enough to convince Jerry that he has a brother. Or convince Morty that he went to prom with a middle-aged English butler. Let's move on. 2, they can only implant positive memories. This obviously leaves us with 2 questions. 1, is it possible to implant memories? And 2, is there a neurological difference between positive memories and negative memories? Now, before we can really dive in, we have to understand that memory is reconstructive. Remembering something isn't like a flashback on television. You don't remember events exactly like they happened. It's more like Legos. When you remember something, you take a bunch of sights, sounds, smells, and other sensations and sort of weave them together or build them into a more coherent narrative. Your mind literally has to rebuild the memory from scratch every time you want to remember it. In all honesty, pretty basic stuff. You'll learn this in most Gen Psych courses, but it's important to have this groundwork. Now we can really dive into the research. So, question 1, can memories be implanted? Yes, moving on. Now, in all seriousness, memory implantation is very possible, and any conversation about it has to start in 1995 with Dr. Elizabeth Loftus and the Lost in the Mall experiments. To make a long story short, Dr. Loftus had 24 participants and tried to convince them that their parents had lost them in the mall as a kid. Loftus actually corresponded with the parents of these participants to get personal details to make the stories more realistic. She would tell the participants the story of them getting lost in the mall, along with 3 true stories from their childhood that she got from the parents. At the end of the experiment, 25% of the participants actually remembered getting lost in the mall. In fact, they not only remembered it, they filled in the details that the researchers had left out. Think about that. They implanted a memory with such efficiency that the person they were implanting filled in details of a fake memory. Now, I know what you're thinking. 25% isn't that impressive. But remember, this was the first experiment to ever successfully implant memories at all. 25% is a pretty good starting point. But yeah, we've got a ways to go before we can see the level of implantation in Total Rickall. So let's fast forward 7 years to 2002 with Dr. Kimberly Wade. Dr. Wade's experiment involved implanting a memory of a hot air balloon ride, and she had a 50% success rate, twice as effective as the Lost in the Mall experiments, and it's only been 7 years. That's a 100% increase of efficiency in less than a decade. Clearly, memory implantation is possible, and it's getting more efficient. But why is memory implantation so easy? Well, there are a couple of reasons, but let's start by going back to the nature of memory. Reconstructive. When we remember something, our brains literally have to take all of the pieces of the memory and put it together in a matter of seconds. And sometimes this process is sloppy. We've all had times where we blanked on someone's name or whose house we were at when something happened. It's not perfect. So if someone gives your brain some extra pieces of a memory, it's not impossible that your brain will incorporate those pieces into the memory even if they don't really belong. But a second and more fascinating reason is the relationship between memory and imagination. The two actually have a lot in common. For starters, they use the same network of parts of the brain, often called the default network. When you remember what you had to eat last Tuesday, you're using the exact same network in the brain as when you daydream and imagine that you could fly. And this is really important. Remember, our memories aren't complete narratives. They're parts and pieces that we've woven together. Sometimes there are holes in that weave, and we have to use our imagination to fill those holes in. Don't just take my word for it either. This study found that amnesiac patients who had literally lost the ability to remember due to damage to their hippocampus also showed that they couldn't imagine anymore. Our brains don't view memory and imagination as that different. So when the parasites toss in a little bit of imagination and pass it off as a memory, our brains are okay with it. So question 1 down. Memory implantation? Completely possible. So what about question 2? Is there a difference between good and bad memories? Well, yes and no. Good and bad are the wrong terms to use. Our brains don't think in terms of good and bad. Rather, they think in terms of fear-based learning and reward-based learning. Think about it this way. Imagine that you got mugged walking home from work one day. The mugger startles you, but your adrenaline kicks in and you're able to dispatch the mugger and escape. You might view this as a bad memory. You probably will view it as a bad memory, because it terrified you. But from a survival standpoint, the experience was extremely helpful. You learned how to respond to imminent danger, how to run away, and you were more aware of your surroundings. The memory increased your chances of survival if you ever get mugged again. What we normally call bad memories are really memories that involve fear, and what we call good memories usually involve reward. When we talk about memory, there are 2 important parts of the brain to discuss. Okay, that's a lie. There are dozens of important parts of the brain, but we're only going to talk about these 2. The amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala, so called because it looks like an almond, is kind of like the launch pad of memories. Amygdalae are the starting point of memories, and they're the part of the brain that gives the memories emotional context. If you have a happy memory of a first kiss or a birthday party, it's only happy because of the amygdala. The amygdala then sends the memory to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for coding short-term memories into the long-term. You don't remember a phone number forever because your hippocampus recognizes that it's not that important. It doesn't need to go into long-term storage. But if a memory survives the hippocampus's gauntlet, it gets to go to long-term storage and you can recall it later. Okay, so we have our neurological foundation laid. Let's move on. What's the answer? What's the difference between fear-based memory and reward-based memory? Well, it all starts in the amygdala. specifically the basolateral amygdala. In the basolateral amygdala, there are two pathways. One that goes to another part of the amygdala, the centromedial amygdala, and one that goes to the prefrontal cortex. Through some neural imaging technology, scientists were able to figure out that when there's a fear-based memory, the basolateral amygdala fires to the centromedial amygdala, and when there's a reward-based memory, it fires to the prefrontal cortex. The neurological and psychological reasons for this get pretty complex, and we definitely aren't getting into it, but there is a physiological difference. It's where the basolateral amygdala fires to. That's what determines if the memory is stored as good or bad. Okay, so we've got a solid answer to both questions. Memory implantation is 100% possible, and there is a neurological difference between good and bad memories. The parasites are looking better and better, but there is one big looming question. Why? What advantage does this have for the parasites? Well, the answer is actually pretty clear-cut, and we don't even have to look at brain scans to figure it out. Reward is better than fear. The research supports this, by the way. In work settings, home settings, and school settings, rewards have been shown to be a better motivator than punishments. And think about what the parasites want. According to Rick, the parasites want to live in your house, eat your food, and multiply. They want to survive, so they implant a positive memory with a reward. I mean, imagine if Photography Raptor implanted a memory of him attacking the Smith family. They would be more likely to reject him, and he wouldn't be able to live in their house, eat their food, or multiply. Instead, the first implanted memory of Photography Raptor is him taking Morty's prom picture. Aw, how cute. Kinda. So here's my reasoning for it. The parasites can implant memories. How they do it really isn't all that important. Maybe it's just basic implantation like the Lost in the Mall experiments. Maybe it's hypnotic speech patterns or hallucinogenics or any combination of the above. They can do it. And they do. They come into your house and implant all kinds of great memories of all the good times you've had together so that you become endeared to them. You accept them as part of the family. Over time, this process becomes more refined until they lose the ability to implant bad memories at all, because why would they want that? It could get them killed. Maybe their ability specifically targets the prefrontal cortex, who knows? But there's your answer. That's how the parasites from Total Rickall work. This might all leave you with one lingering worry. Our memories are who we are. They build our sense of identity, so if our memories might not be real, then how do we know who we are? You know how old you are because you remember your last birthday, but what if that memory is wrong and you're actually 3 years older? You know what high school you went to because you remember it, but what if someone implanted that memory? If our memories aren't safe, then who are we? Memory is who we are, but it's not all we are. Because remember that to our brains, memory and imagination are fundamentally identical. Our memories might not be reliable, but our imaginations are beautifully unstable in a way that only imagination can be. And that's what being human is all about. It's about using our imagination to invent, build, transform, and destroy. As humans, who we are is as much what we remember as what we can create. So use that imagination of yours and keep creating. Because imagination is what gives us such amazing things as Rick and Morty in the first place. And don't worry if you can't remember something 100% accurately. No one can. Being human isn't about the stories we remember. It's about the stories we create. This is Singularity, and remember to stay curious.